So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we make a return to MINAS TIRITH today. It was actually a long time since I got given a MINAS TIRITH replay, and shortly after the last one that we saw I actually got given 3 in quick succession, so I've given a little bit of a cooldown for this one. And by the time this one comes out, this should be the first video, if I'm not mistaken, of 2023, or if not that, then certainly the last of 2022, so that makes for a decent little bookend for the next chapter, as it were. And yes, as I said, this is intended to be a more historical variant of MINAS TIRITH in terms of what's actually happened and the events that we're going to see play out, as I'm sure you can see from the slightly edited exterior to MINAS TIRITH, though not too much, and of course the various positions of the defending armies, and we'll get onto them in just a moment. It's going to play out slightly differently to your standard MINAS TIRITH siege, as much as we often do see a theme on MINAS TIRITH, to be fair. Not this, well, it is going to be the good teams on the defence, of course, but we don't see the actual events happen as they did. It's more of a standard siege where Gondor and some other allies tend to dig in and try to hold off the enemy forces. So, coming forwards in waves, we are going to be seeing the attackers today, plenty of them as well, of course, dominated by Mordor, one of them being under the command of Dominion R here. Orc Maulers. Armour piercing, of course, is going to be useful against Gondor and Dol Amroth, though less so for the Rohirrim, though heavy axemen do have a use against cavalry, though given the kind of situation they find themselves in here, it may be more of a spectacle fight for them than anything else, and they will have to deal, of course, as well with Gondorian projectiles, which they're not going to be the best at. Morannon halberds are going to be very important, of course, in all respects. Plenty of defending cavalry on the field today because of the story-based nature of this battle, and they will of course have their standard armour-piercing advantage over the Gondorians. Morannon infantry here in numbers to pad out the Mordor ranks today. Dependable enough unit, though of course they do find themselves outclassed by the equivalent human units that will be on the field today. More halberds and more maulers. We also have some Uruk captains in and amongst here as well, which is where Gothmog actually is, I believe, although he's blending in with his subordinates for the time being by the looks of it. Yes, Uruk captains, an armour-piercing sword and board bodyguard unit, another good unit to bring to bear against the Gondorians. And to round out the Morannon units as well, we have the Morannon Guard, probably the least useful of this class of unit for Mordor. They've got better spears elsewhere in their roster. They don't have the armour-piercing nor the line-holding capability of the halberds, and the spear malice means they're not going to be quite as good in melee in comparison to the infantry, but they're cheap enough, I suppose. Speaking of which, there are some of the better spears back here. The Minas Morgul Chosen, Beastie 70, another of the attackers on the field today. The big statue of Sauron looming over his minions. But yes, the Minas Morgul Chosen, good in a siege because they are very defensively minded. Nice armour values, good shields as well for mitigating even more of that arrow fire, though they are not the most damaging type of unit for the cost that they cost, for lack of a better word. Sauron's Will, pushing up another siege tower, of course, better armour piercing on them than on the standard Orc Maulers. They will do a good job if they can get into melee, though of course it is going to be a somewhat messy affair once the cavalry starts running around. We've got the Olag High pushing up the Trolls, of course. No matter what happens, you will stand your ground, unless the Olag High, of course, don't come charging into you, in which case standard infantry is going to do little to stop their momentum, though they can find themselves, as any troll can, overwhelmed by their own exuberance. Morannon archers, I don't know how the attacking archers are going to fare on this occasion. Usually I'm all for attackers bringing archers, although in a scenario like this they don't have a choice, they get what they're given. Though, given the amount of cavalry the defenders have to work with, they may not be as useful as they would otherwise be. There are trade-offs to that, though, of course, for the defenders. Very strong temple executioners, the kind of unit that anyone would rightly fear to go up against. A very competent bodyguard heavy swordsman there. Morannon infantry. Interestingly enough, we are seeing the Beasts of Gorgoroth here, who in this version of the game are terrible, actually. However, in the new patch of the game, they are fantastic and probably the standout of Mordor's current roster. So, in a dramatic change of fortunes for the bestial units, but we are, of course, not on that version of the game just yet. So, the Beasts of Gorgoroth loitering with intent here. Morannon infantry pushing up another ram, and more Olag High. We've got the Blackguard of Barad-dûr as well. They're going to be useful for their shields on the approach, of course, and then their mass pushing capabilities should it come down to it. Though if they do get caught on the outside of the walls, they will find themselves languishing under those cavalry charges. Standard Orc archers, of course, are even worse than the Morannon archers we've already seen, but much the same sort of thing that they offer on the field, really, just the differences in terms of quality. More archers. The Orc javelins, which will actually be kind of useful at warding off cavalry as well as doing their standard siege thing of cracking through armoured lines slowly but surely with that armour-piercing damage they can deliver. That's definitely going to be worth bearing in mind as the battle goes along. More Beastie 70s units here, plenty more Orc Maulers and Orc Archers around on halberds. Interesting to see a Troll Catapult as well, the sort of thing which can be very useful once it gets in range of Minas Tirith's mighty walls, because they can then have a few holes marked in them, and then the Orc infantry will more easily be able to pour through those holes than use the siege towers, especially when cavalry is buzzing about them. More Orc Maulers as well. Around on infantry, there's more cavalry also, so they're not going to be completely defenceless. They've got plenty of anti-cavalry troops, and stuff like the Temple Inquisitors will be able to go toe-to-toe, especially with Gondor and some of the more basic Rohirrim Lancer cavalry that they will be facing off against. Though the higher tier stuff from Dol Amroth and Rohan will be a concern for them most assuredly. Around on halberds, more Uruk captains. We have the Easterlings, played by the Warlord. Eastron Horse Guard, so their cavalry is going to be going lance to lance with the enemies as well, though the Eastron Horse Guard are the entry-level runic cavalry unit, and it certainly shows in terms of their survivability, but we'll see how they do. Variag Mercenary Riders, with the amount of cavalry on the field today, this may be an opportunity for horse archers like this to shine. We shall have to wait and see, though of course Rohan can most certainly contest that particular theatre of war. More Eastron Horse Guard and more Variag Mercenary Riders, the main body of his army back here, with the Flagrim, the armour-piercing focus that Rhun have going to be coming into effect here as well. Flagrim, we've got more Variag Mercenaries, albeit this time on foot, and they're good as far as an archer goes, but like I said, I don't know how useful archers like this are going to be as we move into a more cavalry-focused game. A couple of units of Lok Innes Rim, which in this situation actually, given we're probably going to be seeing a fair amount of single HP cavalry, may not be the worst unit in the world, given their slightly heavier armour in comparison to their peers on that tier, but single HP cavalry, you all know my opinion on it on this version of the game. Eastron Clansmen with the armour upgrades will make them just that little bit more effective in melee when it comes down to a ground war, but potentially within the settlements. More Eastron Clansmen, Scion Rim, Gamp Rim, and more Flag Rim back here as well to round off the runic roster with their core, the anchoring arm piercing of the Gamp Rim, and the solid bulwark that is the Scion Rim. We have Tintin playing as Harad, and this looks to be an incredibly cavalry-heavy army as well, with lots of Southron Raiders, a unit of basic horse archers we seldom see. Perhaps a unit we even more seldom see is the Southron Lancers, because, as I've mentioned, single HP cavalry especially, more fragile offerings like this are not really going to be worth your while in the game as it stands if you have to pay your own money for them. And when you consider their lower charge bonus as well, that would be the main reason you would bring them in the first place, so it's kind of a catch-22 there. But they are here, Tintin can use them effectively as well, especially as blocker units maybe for stronger cavalry. Southern Raiders are here. Some of the stronger cav they have at their disposal is here as well, though, with the War Beasts, they're going to be charging forward. We've got the Black Serpents, a very, very fast unit of Lancers, and their second hit point makes them just that little bit more durable, and of course they're very dangerous as well, though. It is going to be all about winning that cavalry war with units such as this, more so than concerning themselves with what goes on within the settlement. Lots of Serpent Guard, and of course the mighty Mumakil at the back, though not so mighty in the current version of the game. They don't have quite the same weaknesses as the Beasts of Gorgoroth, because they are ultimately a stronger unit with better stats, but I don't know. We'll see. They are obviously an iconic part of this battle, so they have to be here, but we'll see if they can overcome their weakness in the current version of the game. Serpent's Fangs, more archers, they can at least muck in melee as well though. Haradrim Spearmen, basic units of spears, and then several units of Southron Pikemen as well. They may have low stats, but if they can be used effectively, and armour piercing can really come into effect. Now then, the units that are retreating from Ramasekor, we have Farkin, we have got the Gondor Cavalry with one level of armour upgrade. I don't see them making too much of an impression in a suicidal frontal charge against that mighty horde, but we'll see. We have the Veterans of Osgiliath, which presumably this is going to be Faramir and his company retreating with the Athelian Rangers as well. Plenty of Citadel Guardsmen and Guards of Osgiliath, so nice and thematic there. Gondor Cavalry covering their retreat, but that's all they're going to be able to do. stakes deployed behind them to buy them a little bit more time, force the cavalry to go round, but this is going to be where the battle kicks off. We have one of the reinforcing armies from Tuck the Gamer. This is the Gondorian wing of the reinforcements, so some unupgraded Gondor cavalry. Overall, we didn't mention this in the last roster, but the Gondor cavalry is a very underwhelming unit in the current version of the game, but perhaps against other single HP cav they can at least be passable. You would certainly hope so. Pinnithgaling cavalry as well, coming from the Gondorian dependencies further west, and they're going to be heading to reinforce their liege. We have the Gondor archers fully upgraded, so these men are all pretty well equipped. We've got some Pelargia marines, Gondor spearmen fully upgraded, some mighty Fountain Guard and Wardens of the White Tower, plenty of axemen of Lasarnak. Lasarnak, of course, fairly close by. Furlong the Fat, I believe, the name of Lasarnak's leader. And then we've got some Citadel Guard over here as well, so plenty of armour piercing, plenty of good units to reinforce for later. Of course, the more iconic of the reinforcements cresting the hill, going to be Hammer here under the command, well, Rohan under the command of Hammer. We've already mentioned the cavalry-centric nature of this battle. Riddermark skirmishers going to be very useful for winning that particular cavalry war with their javelins and their anti-cavalry and melee, though once again, single HP cavalry, they do have their limitations. Riddermark cavalry most certainly have their limitations. Single HP shock cavalry are not particularly useful, but perhaps in this situation they can be because they're facing off against other units of the same type. Riders of the Fold are the slightly tankier units of horse archers that Rohan have at their disposal on the main line anyway. And then of the higher tier variety, of course, the Red Shields of Erkenbrand fill that particular role. Once upon a time, I remember Rohan's cavalry force being really very, very good all round, though we scarcely see many of these units anymore because of the way the balance is in the game as it stands. Riddermark cavalry, some Eastmark horse archers are the entry-level horse archers, so plenty of fast-moving ranged units here. First Marshal's bodyguard are here as well, so multiple HP lancers, very similar actually to the Black Serpents that we have already beheld. Riddermark cavalry, we've got the Aerid of Aldburg over here as well, which are much more like the Serpent Guard that we've also already seen, and over here the Sons of Aeol, which we haven't actually seen any out-and-out lance knights on the field yet. This is the only unit so far, and they are a terrifying force when they get up to speed. There's also a few units of infantry back here, I say a few, some Westmark Marshals and some Shield Maidens to round things off as they trail behind the cav force. And the units within Minas Tirith itself, we have the Flame of Arnor playing as Dol Amroth, of course, Imrahil and his men present within the settlement at the time. Doran Ernil pikemen with the armour upgrades, some Black Swan renegades with that armour piercing, and some Tirith Air marksmen to help with the ranged war. We also have some Mithrandir's retinue here, very nice unit of cavalry to do some damage, some Perithil riders from Dol Amroth, some more horse archers. There's a huge amount of horse archers on the field today, more than we've seen in a long, long time. We've got the Perithil Horse Guard as well, so more melee cavalry, which will actually be useful considering the vast amount of cavalry on the field. We have the Knights of the Silver Swan. Standard Swan Knights are something we haven't seen in so long. They are actually very similar to the Temple Inquisitors, but if you're going to bring cav as Dol Amroth, you're not going to choose to bring this kind of unit. Of course, this is the vanilla model for them as well, not the blackened version of the Black Swan Renegades, and nor is it the updated version of the Knights of the Silver Swan there. So it's kind of nice to see them again. The mighty Arathirim as well, the Lance Knights of Dol Amroth, which we have actually proven really to be the best of this class of unit in the game as it stands. So alongside the Rohan cavalry, this could be truly terrifying. Perithil Horse Guards and more Knights of the Silver Swan, so much cavalry on the field today, it's going to be quite difficult to keep track of it all. We've got Gondor Spearmen here in force also. Marksmen of Caer Andros, we've got more Fountain Guard, more Marksmen, and then Imlothian Honour Guard here as well. So this is going to be probably the most chaotic Minas Tirith battle that we've seen so far, but also the most accurate one by nature, I think. So we'll get this show on the road with the first of the units as they retreat from Osgiliath and Ramas Ekor and charge towards the enemy, perhaps in a bold rear guard. So the retreat begins for those on foot at the very least, and the Gondor cavalry will be left behind to cover this particular retreat. Though against that huge force, there's only so much that this is going to be able to do. As I've mentioned already, the Gondor cavalry, not exactly the finest when it comes to units like this. They are going to be following the retreat back, albeit it seems rather a pointless thing if they're not going to engage the army. We do have the fast movers from Mordor and Rhun approaching. Even then, I mean, considering the presence of pikes and spears here, it wouldn't exactly be the easiest thing for certainly the Lance Cavalry to have to try and deal with. Meanwhile, the Dol Amrothians are coming out. The Arathirim at the centre as well. And I mean, Dol Amroth have got some pretty nasty cavalry units themselves. With the forces retreating from Osgiliath and Ramsakor, we will have the first engagements on the field today. Parathil Riders loosing some arrows forwards. Temple Inquisitors going to be taking the Parathil Horse Guard head on. The Parathil Horse Guard actually lost their bottle there right towards the end, but it's too late for the Flame of Arnor. He is going to have to engage with the sword-wielding Black Númenóreans, and following in as well, going to be some Southron Lancers. So this is rather a rare sight, certainly in this version of the game, where we'll be seeing what is largely a line battle be contested with cavalry entirely. Intriguing to see the Guards of Osgiliath turn around. I don't know what the rules regarding that were. I would have thought that these units had to retreat directly to the settlement, but it does make the job of the attacking cavalry that much more difficult. Though horse archers should be a pretty good option for whittling them down. Shooting circle being used by the Variag mercenary riders. We are seeing the difference here in quality between the entry-level Haradrim and Runic cavalry and the significantly more heavily armoured Dol Amroth knights, and that has proven to be a very big difference maker indeed. And there's plenty more where that came from. Under normal circumstances, of course, cavalry heavy armies may not be the answer, but in ones that follow a narrative structure like this, it can still be very, very useful. The Arathirim here at the centre, we've already noted how strong the Arathirim actually are, the tankiest and strongest lance knights that the game has to offer, really. And even in this context, the Knights of the Silver Swan, with that armour, going to be more than a match for the Riders of Evil. So that initial cavalry force from the Forces of Darkness has been, let's be honest, completely swept aside. With more cavalry as well for later to come, that will be the way that the defenders will hope to win this, as of course they did in the actual battle itself as well. Still a completely chaotic scene here. Gondor cavalry still doing its thing. The shooting circle being thoroughly interrupted now. Variag mercenary riders getting bisected by, once again, the Dol Amroth cavalry. And the Variag mercenary riders, I mean, when it comes to defending themselves in melee against this level of opposition, it was always going to be very difficult for them. We are seeing, though, why, when it comes to cavalry, the heavier, the tankier, the better. In this version of the game, light cavalry just isn't really worth anything, really. Even if they were similar in cost to something like Orc Fodder, I would still question bringing them in many situations with the pitiful amount of damage they're capable of laying down. Though at the very least, in a situation like this, both sides have to deal with such an anchor around their waist. But there we have it. And much of what you saw there was the strength of the Dol Amrothians. The lances coming back out, as do the swords. Will they retreat back to Minas Tirith now? The infantry is starting to move forward, you can see in the distance there. That will prove to be a bit more of a problem given the amount of halberds and spears and the damage that this cavalry has already taken. I don't know how much damage they would necessarily be able to do. And let's not forget, in this sort of situation, cavalry does need to be pretty domineering for the defenders. Gondor cavalry coming back for another bite. Orc archers out in front, so we're seeing a slow move forward, though nothing too crazy as of yet. As soon as this cavalry gets in range, if it does indeed decide to charge headlong into this army, the archers should open up and do as much damage as they possibly can on the approach, although I'm very surprised to not see the halberdiers move further forward. They're moving forward Moran on guard now, but I mean, considering the amount of time they've had to react to this, I'm very surprised that the attackers have allowed this to happen. Shooting circle, Parathil riders, so trading back and forth now. This is actually probably one of the few ways in which the attacking archers will be able to get some good value So I don't think they will mind too much about this. Gondor cavalry on the way forwards as well, but with the Moran on guard on the way to screen, shouldn't be too much of a concern. Gondor cavalry going to charge in, trying to reposition themselves, but as they do charge in, again, just one unit of spears, really? Is that really all they could spare? All they could muster? Forward comes Sauron's will. I mean, this cavalry is not the most challenging thing in the world to zone out, I've got to be honest. More damage being done. Point blank, Parathil Horse Guard taking hits but able to withstand that damage. Melee cavalry not going to be as devastating off the charge, of course, but they will do what they can. Around on halberds moving forward. Orc maulers, of course, heavy axemen when it comes to being in melee with cavalry will do just fine as long as they don't take too hefty of a charge to begin with. Parathil Horse Guard looking like they may end up routing. Charging back through going back through the Sauron's will really sealed their fate. The two shooting circles out front. I don't know where the Arathirim went, but the Parathil Horse Guard doing their best to charge in with their more limited charge bonus. Orc Maulers' victory seems certain. Up close and personal, that armour piercing coming into effect. Knights of the Silver Swan in the distance, so Dol Amroth still filtering their cavalry in. What do we have? Moran on guard. Still taking hits, but still not too much of a problem. I mean, Serpent's Fangs, poison projectiles, they do get a nice charge there into the Moran on infantry, and it connects nicely as well, so that's going to be quite a lot of damage done in a relatively short space of time. Swan Knights also following them in as well, who will be able to look after themselves a little bit better in sustained combat, but they've already taken a lot of damage from their exertions facing off against the cavalry in the open field. The poison projectiles will be helping to rout these units off as well, so the Serpent's Fangs definitely coming in useful there. There's a little bit of friendly fire coming in as well. Surprised the Swan Knights haven't already routed, actually, given that they are surrounded and they have taken a few poison arrows at this point. More resilient, mentally at least, than perhaps I was willing to give them credit for. Getting bloodied up now. Haradrim spearmen milling around. Looks like they are actually going to be killed to the last unit here. There are still a few Dol Amroth cavalrymen making a nuisance of themselves, but instantly routing as they connect with the Mordor infantry. And now the march towards the walls begins, although once again we are seeing another unit of Parathil Riders come out. There's only so long in this battle. I mean, given the fact that it is a Minas Tirith siege, I'm a little bit surprised given the relatively slow pace of the attacking armies making it to the walls, that it is only 33,000 frames. Although I suppose once the Rohirrim arrive, that's going to be a real game changer. Are they going to get into shooting circle, or are they simply going to continue firing backwards? No, they are. More damage being done to Mordor on the approach. Of course, with all of this cavalry having already been utilised, the amount of infantry within Minas Tirith itself is going to be somewhat limited. They are going to be reliant on the reinforcements bailing them out, but then that is lore appropriate as well. Moran on archers firing in. It is interesting that it's the halberdiers that they're sending forward first and foremost, because they're probably one of the better targets for those Parathil Riders to shoot at. So that is a little bit surprising. Looks like they are out of ammunition now though, with their swords drawn. So the shooting circle's not going to be terribly effective. Are they simply going to be allowed to perish on the end of those halberds? A few of them are. The rest of them, however, will flee. scene of carnage already exists out on the field. And they are going to charge into the Orc Maulers. So far this battle has been pretty much entirely made up of Dol Amroth taking little bites out of the Mordor war effort. The balance of forces is evenly matched. Be very surprised if they didn't rout at some point. Could they go after the Troll Catapult? Probably, but it wouldn't be all that effective, I wouldn't have thought. Either this way. Harad mounted divisions will be the last ones to move forwards, but everything else making its way towards the walls. They are going to charge in. I mean, when they're moving, the Gamperin will take a bit of damage off the charge, but as soon as the Halberdiers come down, or Halberds come down, I should say, they're going to make very, very quick work with the Parathil Riders, as you can see. And that's going to be that. Surely they're going to rout, or maybe not. Well, yeah, surely now. In fact, I think they will just die to the last cavalry unit once again, so actually managing to mentally hold themselves together to the point where they just straight up die. How very interesting. But now the Troll Catapult, is it in range of the walls? I don't think so. Still a fair way to travel. And I'm sure that the next phase of the battle will be the more traditional thing that we see with Minas Tirith. The siege towers stacking up on the walls, veterans of Osgiliath getting themselves ready. You can see there is a very limited amount of infantry that they can work with within the walls, but enough to hold the line while the Rohirrim and all of the levies from the rest of Gondor arrive to bail the White City out. And a lot of the units in here are also of fairly high quality. I mean, or even the basic units have got their full upgrades, but stuff like the Nimlothian Honour Guard. I've seen a few Raven Helms around here. Wanderers of Nimrodel we saw briefly as well earlier on. The sort of unit which should strike fear into the hearts of the attackers in this version of the game, which seems to continue to live with body-piercing projectiles ever the crutch for defenders. The Haradrim infantry moving forward, not bound by the same time constraints as the cavalry. Slowly but surely, the attackers make their way forwards. I don't think we're going to be seeing anything other than the first layer, even though I think in reality, of course, the Orcs did make it a fair ways into Minas Tirith up the layers. But I don't think we're going to see that on this occasion, based entirely upon the amount of time that there is left in this battle. Black Swan Renegades, another very fine unit for this sort of situation, holding the line nicely as heavily armoured line infantry. The armour-piercing bite that they have will be very, very useful against the Orcs in particular. All of their defensive values pretty much coming from the armour values that they possess, limited though they may be in certain situations. Marksman Caerandros firing from the walls, of course, another good unit in melee as well as at range, so loosing arrows alongside the Tirithea marksmen, who lack perhaps the melee expertise of their fellows from Caerandros, but very similar sort of level that they offer at range. Southron pikemen moving forward, and they will of course get shredded. Every arrow that hits very, very likely to result in a kill. So again, it's a little bit peculiar that this is the unit that moved forward first, although it is worth mentioning that phalanx units like this, when they're in formation, actually walk quicker than standard units that are walking, though of course they cannot run when they're in formation, so it's kind of meant to be a bit of a positive trade-off, though in this situation, because they have been moving forward at the same rate, they have actually arrived first, and it allows the damage to be done. Trebuchet loosing their projectiles. There are the Nazgul at the centre of things. The siege tower taking a bit of damage from the trebuchet, though I would imagine that the defending artillery is probably going after the blocks of infantry that it can perceive. first hit really that they've managed to score. Sent a mess of those halberds, though they were in loose formation, so it won't be too concerning for the attackers. And of course the artillery having to be used in such a way is maybe not the most efficient, so it is something else that the attackers can take heart from, really. I think the archers will actually end up being more of a concern. The arrow towers also starting to get involved. Very limited amount of damage they will do, but it all adds up. Further back, still mostly concentrating their fire on the Harad infantry, which is understandable given the Haradrim's lower resilience when it comes to dealing with arrow fire. Now having to angle their shots a little bit, however. Serpent Guard, Orc Maulers, the Easterlings taking the initiative on the other side. Several rams also being brought forwards. Trebuchet once again firing, going after the Nazgul, I think. Still only scoring hits on halberdiers for the time being. And I would imagine that Mordor aren't going to simply place the siege towers in place and then wait. I think they will move immediately to try and claim the walls. I mean, this section of the city is almost being completely abandoned right from the off. There's cavalry over here, but nothing else. And they are instead going to simply use this choke point, I guess, which, considering the more limited amount of melee power they have over here now, maybe that is for the best. Reliant as they will be on their reinforcements. Ravenhelm's going to be taking the lead for a defensive infantry unit here, although there's no infantry unit ready to block the orcs from claiming this section of wall here, which may be a little bit of an oversight. They need to get some unit up there fairly quickly, surely. Otherwise the Orc Maulers will be able to claim the wall unopposed, and it's going to be too late now. Siege tower already dropping its doors. I suppose they can simply shoot up there with their archers, but it is a strange thing to surrender completely. Cavalry still there as well. More Mordor orcs going to claim that section of wall also completely unopposed. The blocks of Ravenhelms going to be offering a little bit of cover to these TIRITH marksmen still plugging away at the attackers as they languish at the base of the walls. I mean, the Orc Maulers are immediately trying to come down here, which I think maybe is a little bit of an error. If they simply waited up on the walls there for the gate to be brought down, they could then have started to filter down here. And that would have been a real worry. Orc Maulers as it is, though, fighting in a corner. Armour piercing will be useful against both the Gondor Spearmen and the Black Swan Renegades, but the quality discrepancy here is significant, and the very low melee defense of the Orc Maulers also going to be a real problem. Some of the Gondor Spearmen heading up onto the walls as well. Moran infantry claiming this section of wall. I mean, the entirety of this wall is going to be completely blanketed by mostly Easterlings. Over here they will have significantly more resistance to have to deal with. The Ravenhelms should be just fine of facing Moran infantry. Elsewhere, not a whole lot else though. Serpent Guard should make for a slightly more worthy foe for the Serpent Guard, for the Ravenhelms, I should say. And just getting more and more manpower up on the walls. So Haradrim Spearmen may not be the finest unit in terms of quality, but just getting this wall completely occupied. And they will then have doorways that they can use to start getting in and amongst the defenders here, so it's going to get fairly messy, you would suggest, fairly quickly. All of this cavalry now within the walls as well. I mean, there's only so far that they can retreat, and in fact I don't think they're going to be able to. at least not unscathed. The Orc Maulers managing to clip them. With Randir's retinue barging in as well, just to try and get that cavalry a little bit more cover on its retreat. The gate's still not being battered down, so they should probably get on that. Very slow process. Out of ammunition, Orc archers getting up onto the walls. Scattered Gondorian resistance. That Serpent Guard, though, surrounded as it was, the Ravenhelms proving the superior unit, and the Haradrim Spearmen also getting shot up pretty badly. I think by Athelian Rangers. I don't know whether that was necessarily an efficient choice, but it does mean the Haradrim Spearmen will not be able to turn this fight around completely, with their numbers deprived. Still the front line not really being tested too much. A few units that they have in reserve. I mean, if they are left to their own devices, as I've mentioned several times at this point, the attackers would of course win, but it's just a question of when the reinforcements are allowed to be triggered, which I imagine is not going to be too long in the making. The Gondorian levies will take longer to get here simply because they're more infantry focused, but it's going to be the Rohirrim, of course, that are the real stars of the show. More orcs pouring forth. Immediately as well getting introduced to the business end of the Athelian Rangers' arrows. And veterans of Osgiliath firing their shots overhead. The Easterlings very much in control of this section of the city, almost completely unopposed. We haven't really seen the Easterlings, much like in the movie, we haven't really seen the Easterlings in visible combat. But at least on this occasion we have the guarantee that we will. More arrows. With the gates now felled, surely that's going to mean the Olag High will burst forth and start attacking the front line. Gondorians tasked with standing their ground. More Orc Maulers coming down here, but then Imlothian Honor Guard once again will be blocking their path. Far too much quality against that kind of unit, but numbers will start to come into play here if more and more Orcs find their way up here. The Ravenhelms have done very, very well though against the kind of units they've been facing off against. There are the Olag High. Whatever comes through that gate, you must stand your ground. And I actually think on this occasion they won't get squashed quite so horribly, purely because there are quite a few more of them, and the line is maybe a little bit more rigid than it was in the movie. Trading back and forth with the archers now as well, but this is a fight that Gondor will certainly take, given that the veterans of Osgiliath are the ones engaged in it. Very, very resilient archer indeed. This front line is pretty well set up for holding, though. Plenty of pikes, good amount of line infantry and spears alongside them as well. The cavalry will offer a little bit of mass as well, should the need arise. Minas Morgul chosen in there as well. Very recently we saw them capable of enacting a pretty decent mass push. The Easterlings moving forwards now. More Eastron clansmen on the approach. An efficient enough infantry unit, but at this point we are just waiting for the reinforcements to arrive, aren't we? More units pouring up onto the walls. I mean, there's only so much that's going to be left outside the walls at this rate, and if the fight takes place entirely within Minas Tirith's bounds, then I really don't think the Rohirrim cavalry will be the saviours that they are meant to be, which would be a little bit unfortunate if timing was the reason why. They arrived too late in the day. The day was already lost by the time they arrived. Most unfortunate. Defending cavalry still doing its best, but I mean with a lot of halberdiers and line infantry. That could well end up being a problem meanwhile. The Rohirrim now cresting the hill. It's not quite the intimidating sight that it was in the movie, of course, but then there's nothing really that can be done in that regard. Looking up, you can see the slightly edited nature of this version of Minas Tirith, with the back part of it being cut off like that, but we'll try and ignore that. First Marshal's bodyguard. Is that meant to be Éomer? With the Sons of Yorl in position as well. We will just quickly see what's going on over here, and slowly but surely Gondor are being forced backwards, so it may be necessary that the Gondorian levy infantry comes in here as well to maybe reclaim the interior of the settlement at this rate, because I don't know if Gondor are going to have the strength to cling on to it as much as they would like. Moran on infantry, still reserves in here, including some attacking archers as the Rohirrim cavalry begins to approach. Southron pikemen will get into position, Moran on guard will get into position. I mean, it's going to be grisly this for the attackers, but honestly, a lot of the units they have over here, halberdiers, spears, Scion Rim, this could be where we see the single HP cavalry at its very worst. I kind of hope not. I kind of hope the Rohirrim do the business here as they set themselves up in position. Leading the way, Harad of Oldburg, Riddermark cavalry, and fleeing at the sight. Harad of Oldburg, though, but charging first into pikes. I mean, it works in the movie because of the mass, but Medieval 2's mechanics are not going to be all that forgiving when it comes to this sort of thing, unfortunately. And the mighty charge, at least the first variant of the charge, has been maybe a little bit less impressive than it needed to be. And those Sons of Yorl are going to die completely if they are allowed to stay in melee with the Southron pikemen. That would be most unfortunate if by the time the Mumakil arrive, all of the Rohirrim are already dead. What a shame that would be. Riddermark cavalry in sustained melee as well, Harad of Oldburg. I appreciate the idea, but sometimes you have to tailor the battle to the limitations and the mechanics of Medieval 2, and having to charge headlong into the pikes and halberds was never going to end well for Rohan here. They may still be able to turn this around, but not if they continue to bang their head against this particular wall. And certainly not as, well, the Red Shields are bulldozing their way through. At the very least, no more reinforcements will be making their way inside Minas Tirith to put more pressure on the defenders that are already there. But with the Mumakil and the rest of the Harad cavalry also approaching, maybe Theoden's mighty effort will all be in vain on this occasion. Still a fair amount of cavalry left, but Orc Javelins in there. Shield Maidens of Rohan doing their best. Lots of routing Rohan cavalry. The Beasts of Gorgoroth are running amok. Obviously we didn't even see them get into melee. If there is a worse unit type in this version of Reforged than single HP cavalry, it would be monstrous units. The Mumakil get away with it slightly more than the Beasts, but the Beasts are a truly terrible unit in this version of the game, in spite of looking fairly intimidating. Another charge from the Rohirric cavalry. Forward come the Serpent Guard. Riders of the Fold trying to get involved. Moran on halberds. Those phalanx units doing the business. Serpent Guard now getting involved too. Riddermark skirmishers melee cavalry, so they'll do decently in this sort of situation, but defending artillery trying to help bail out the Rohirrim. But yes, turned back unceremoniously there, Rohan. Inside the settlement though, the defenders, without reinforcements, readily available reinforcements from outside, the defenders have managed to stabilise things in here and are fighting the good fight. Up on the walls, Moran on infantry, having to go toe to toe with the Ravenhelms, who have performed very well actually. Still plenty of Easterlings ready to move forward, and more Gamprim as well. They are still going to run out of brutal against the Serpent's Fangs there. They are still going to run out of manpower here, though, in the interior of the settlement. But, as I say that, the other reinforcements from Gondor will be arriving, and I do think that will still be enough for victory. Eastmark Horse Archers. I do believe, though, that this is more reminiscent of the movie version than the book version, if I'm being honest, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Mumakil actually came up in the first wave in the books, and by the time the Rohirrim arrived, all the Mumakil were actually already dead, which is a change I think the movie did well. I think the Rohirrim versus the Haradrim in Return of the King is probably the most iconic part of that movie. So there it is, but as it is, I think this is a little bit more reminiscent of the movie, only it hasn't neglected to include more readily the Easterlings and Dol Amroth, which is nice. Moran infantry taking hits there as well. They need to be careful not to rout their own men with their artillery here. Could they win this battle yet off the strength of their artillery? That line battle's still underway, and unfortunately for the Mumakil, they don't really have any cavalry to charge into, really. The Minas Rim are out here as well, so there's still some runic cataphracts. Rohan still kind of present on the field. More Minas Rim. I mean, it's a really chaotic fight at this point. Rohan cavalry that may very well have been routing initially, that has now come back, and interestingly enough, on this occasion, it's going to be Gondorian cavalry that the Mumakil are getting tangled up with. Gondorian infantry relief on its way forwards, and with that Gondorian cavalry as well, and maybe the attackers less prepared for the Gondorian lancers to come in, and actually a few more of these charges are landing in areas that you would prefer as a defender. Peneth Galen cavalry also charging in, Uruk captains. Black Serpents alongside the war beasts of Harad, easily able to crush Gondor cavalry, of course, but what about when that infantry arrives? They've still got a few units of infantry out here, a little bit of range support as well to do the business on the approach, but Gondor archers arriving. Mumakil bloodied, a few of them already dead. Not being utilised as a bludgeon here, but again, they tend to die off so quickly that when you do that, it's not really too much of a problem. Another unit of Olag High moving in. Still this front line holds, only just though. The attackers starting to force the defenders back. There's a lot of attackers still in here as well. Cavalry-centric nature of the defence here may prove to be not good enough. In fact, they are retreating now. Oof. Crumbling that trebuchet. There's Sir Ian McCallan trying to encourage the ranks. Things are looking pretty bleak at this point in time after all, and this is after the Rohirrim reinforcements have arrived, so maybe it's not going to work out the way that we were expecting here. Serpent Guard surely going to falter. Still these Moran halberds, who, let's be honest, the Moran halberds have probably been the MVP of the attacking army so far. Dependable phalanx unit. And as much as I go on and on about how single HP cavalry is really not all that effective in this version of the game, phalanx units of all types have long been a staple of any army that can field them in this version of Reforged. Veterans of Osgiliath and Marksman of Caer Andros trying to bring down the Serpent's Fangs, but depleted as they are, even though the Serpent's Fangs themselves are pretty low on numbers, they are just about going to have enough here to be victorious. As they continue to surge forwards, the main gate has fallen. Still a few Olag High left alive. Street-to-street combat, urban warfare in all its grisly glory. They still have that catapult as well, the attackers. Still stuff like Flag Rim left alive. Gondor archers firing away, Axemen of Lasarnak arriving. Stuff like the Citadel Guard is going to be very, very important to the defenders' efforts moving forwards. Victory seems certain. Pelagia Marines on the way forwards as well. The Axemen of Lasarnak's damage may be a bit of a saving grace, but it depends on how long they can keep themselves alive for. That armour will help them with that, but Heavy Axemen never been known for that longevity in combat, even some of the stronger offerings from that class of unit. Imlothian Honour Guard as well. Ooh, Olag high up on the walls. That'd be an intimidating sight if you were the Gondorian relief force. Still cavalry routing around in the background. Still Rohan cavalry left alive after their embarrassing display, let's be honest. Scion Rim moving up here to finish off the Gondorians as the attackers try to move forwards. Gondorian relief army just lost its general. Having a look here, the Trebuchet crew being committed. That, I believe, was probably the Easterling general that just fell. So Rhun maybe a little bit more susceptible to routing now. What's left of the Rohan cavalry trying to do its thing. Wardens of the White Tower. Now they move in, trying to salvage the settlement as more of Mordor goes off to try and contest the higher levels. Stuff like the Citadel Guard. Armour piercing on armour piercing. I mean, the Flag Rim they're probably the more efficient unit in this situation, though the Citadel Guard might outright win. At this point in time, efficiency might not be the most important thing. It might just be who has the most quality left to them. Were they generous enough with that Gondorian relief force? And I mean, the Nazgul are in here, so that's going to be a very difficult foe to have to try and deal with. And now the roles are reversed, really, with the attackers technically the ones holding the main gate choke point, and the defenders trying to get in here to bail them out. They could try and use the siege towers, and indeed that is what they are doing. A good idea. Wardens of the White Tower will be enough to finish off the Easterlings that are over here, and the Gondorian archers as well will at least contest this area over here. I don't know necessarily looking at this. I mean, Orc Javelins, Orc Archers, Variag Mercenaries. None of these units are particularly strong, so Gondor should still be able to rely upon their quality further into the settlement to help them hold on. And looking at that, I think the defenders should still be okay, so I think the intended outcome will still transpire, just about, but perhaps not in the manner that the scenario runners were expecting or wanting. Plenty of those out of ammunition Gondor archers, but they're not going to do so well. Even against only 2 of the remaining Olag High, it's not going to go that well for them, you'd imagine, especially not with their captains arriving. Elsewhere, though, they will be fine, and reinforcements will make their presence felt as they try to push their way in. But this force at the main gate is probably going to lose for the Gondorians. Orc archers on their way out. Moving forwards. Troll catapult spinning on the spot. I mean, if the troll catapult can get a good volley or 2 into this, rout them all off, then all of these units will be freed up to try and deal with the rest of the reinforcements, and then maybe try and push their way through to the town centre and outright victory. But I'm not sure. Running in place, oh dear. The artillery caught within the building, effectively killing itself there. That's a bit of a unique situation. It's not one of the more common artillery bugs that we see from Medieval 2, but there it is. On this front line over here, yeah, the quality means that momentum, once again shifting in favour of the defenders over here. Those Ravenhounds have probably been the most consistent unit for the defenders, honestly. Very, very effective at holding the walls, giving them that damage spike when they need it. And they have been somewhat of an underwhelming unit in the past, so that is rather interesting. Expensive for what they offer, though this is a custom scenario. Fountain Guard up on the walls. Gondor still losing over here, though still fighting hard. And I think the fact that they're just distracting a lot of these more high-end attacking units at the gatehouse is going to be the most important thing as this battle chugs on. Rohan somehow managed to get within the settlement. How do these rid of? I mean, I guess they just push through, right? But trying to get some rear charges here. Mr. Hammer doing his best to try and get some kills after the disaster outside the walls. It's a situation where instead of Theoden being the hero of the hour, it may end up being Furlong the Fat. And there was another one. Angbor is his name? Perhaps? Lamadon? All of the little fiefs have got their own leader, of course, but I think those are the only two that I can remember off the top of my head. I can't remember the leader of Pelagia or Anfalas or anywhere like that. Or the Blackroot Vale or Pinneth Galen. They all exist, and they are all in Divide and Conquer as well, when you play as the Gondorians, so I should remember them, but I don't. Wards of the White Tower, meanwhile, slicing their way through the Variag mercenaries. Landing good hits. Fountain Guard defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Still some of the Rohirrim cavalry back there, trying to get in the way of the Troll Catapult and succeeding, though the fact that it's lodged in the level geometry means that it's maybe less of a threat than it would otherwise have been. Fighting well. And nudging in here, Riders of the Fold, defeat seems certain. Gondor archers firing away as well. There's Wards of the White Tower. A unit which I underrated for a long time, but I have come to respect them, even if they're not quite on the same level as something like the Royal Legion of Armenelos over in Numenor. They are still a very, very accomplished sword and board infantry unit. Variag mercenaries trying to do some damage to the Gondorians that are in behind them, though I think they ought to be worried about what's further up the hill as well, with Gondor about to completely overrun what remains of the attackers that were sent up here to try and take the higher levels of the settlement. Defeat seems certain. Rohan infantry broken and fighting to the death. They will now move forward and they will silence those mercenaries, finishing them off. Can't imagine they'll last too long, morale-wise. They will still need to deal with the forces at the main gate here. The reinforcements have held them in place for long enough and done a decent amount of damage to them, actually, but they will still need to be finished, the coup de grace delivered, so to speak. Gondorian archers doing their thing. It's been kind of a bizarre reenactment, this. It's been almost like a distorted version of the event. You can see exactly what was supposed to be happening. It hasn't followed the exact script, though the outcome is more or less the same. Maybe less Rohirrim alive. Maybe the Gondorian defenders who were already at the city held out a little bit better. Again, the Gondorian reinforcements may be proving to be the more decisive of the two relief armies arriving. Harad mercenaries defeats a distinct possibility. I'm surprised they haven't already routed, actually, in the face of a Gondor bodyguard unit like this. Showcasing perhaps they're a little bit more resilient than I was willing to give them credit for as well. A lot of units in this battle actually have, when you thought they would rout, they've held on for just that little bit longer. And there they go. They flee. Defeat seems certain for the Fountain Guard. Only 10 of them remain. Still fighting hard though, and still those Nimlothian Honor Guard are over there as well. I don't know where the Nazgul necessarily went, but the Nimlothians finally going to be able to finish off this flag Rhun. It's actually been a very competitive defence of Minas Tirith in many ways, even though it was meant to follow a narrative structure. It has actually been pretty interesting, and it's very atypical to the kind of sieges that we usually see because of the presence of lots of cavalry, because of the fact that many of the defenders were in reinforcing armies that would be committed later on. The attackers also had to approach the battle in a certain way, and it has actually resulted in it being pretty interesting. I mean, for a while there in the middle section of the battle, after the Rohirrim reinforcements largely failed to do what they were intended to, you could even have expected the attackers to go on to win it. Turn history upon its head. But in the end, no. We are going to see the correct outcome transpire once more. Citadel Guard on the way forwards. And I do think that the quality of a lot of the Gondorian units had something to do with that as well. Clearly they had a lot of high-end defending units. The reinforcing column as well included a lot of good infantry. There was also that Dol Amroth cavalry which so comprehensively won the very initial cav-on-cav engagement. And then Moran on Halberds, victory is a distinct possibility. And further back, victory seems certain for the Orc Archers. Are you sure? I guess there's only one Fountain Guardsman left. Even then, though. Troll Catapult Crew, one of the last things left. I don't think the Nazgul have been killed off completely. The Uruk Captains are there. We haven't seen too much in the way of general kills just yet, which is why I'm surprised that the Nazgul seem to be MIA. Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan moving forward, who have been kept in reserve just in case. As another multiple HP unit. They'll do just fine though. Still fighting up on the walls occurring, and that may very well have been what remained of the Nazgul. And that surely is going to be that. I don't think there's really anything left. Apparently there is a red star over here. So yeah, that was... Actually, that was the Harad general being finished off by the Ravenhelms. The only other thing is a red arrow. No, that's not quite right either. Only Orc Archers. So yeah, it must be that one Serpent Guard. that is the last one fighting. The Harad, the last to contest Minas Tirith. A mighty duel. 1-to-1, you would probably back the Ravenhelm just because, well, A, he's not bloodied, but also, well, I take it back, but a dedicated melee unit would under most circumstances be considered the favourite in that engagement, but the Serpent Guard, or Serpent's Fang I should say, victorious. Are they all going to mob him? Probably, yeah. An honourable duel was observed, but now it's more of an execution than a duel. And there we have it. Victory. And, you know, within 7%. So for a scenario that was meant to be highly narrative focused, like I said, it ended up being surprisingly competitive. And indeed, I suppose, with the exception, I think, of the runic captain there, Ulfang, who was a character in the First Age, I believe. I think all the others are actually fairly appropriate captains, especially Imrahil, Faramir and Theoden, of course. Though Theoden probably will be a little bit ashamed of what happened with the Rohirrim. They actually did a decent amount of damage in the end, although I imagine a lot of that was to do with horse archers more so than that initial charge, which is a bit of a shame, but like I said, if you're going to try and reenact that charge, you can't have it be like in the movie where the Mordor spearmen essentially got in the way first, because the mass isn't the same in Medieval 2. The spears, and especially the halberdiers, are going to do an awful lot of damage, but in the end it didn't matter too much. The intended outcome was achieved, albeit through rather roundabout means. So let's see what did the damage for Farkin/Imrahil's army here. The cavalry varying fates. I think actually the standard Swan Knights proved to be very, very useful here, because they are melee cavalry ultimately, and most of these kills did come from cavalry on cavalry engagements. The Arathirim was still alive towards the end game, but yeah, I mean, they're good enough, but fair play to the Swan Knights. For a single HP cavalry unit, they did quite well. Knights of the Silver Swan, obviously less so. The Horse Guard absorbed a fair amount of arrow fire after they were done winning that cavalry engagement, but again, difficult. Wanderers of Nimrodel doing decently, 372, considering the rather odd and lopsided nature of this fight. It's a fine amount of kills for Rangers, although in a normal siege, in this version of the game, of course, Rangers, you want them to get as many kills as possible because you need to lean on them a little bit more for their effectiveness, but 372 is fine given the narrative situation here. Black Swan Renegades doing quite nicely as well. Doran Ernil Pikemen fighting on that very competitive frontline engagement just in through the gates. And the Tirithea Marksmen, maybe a little bit disappointing given the fact they had clear shots most of the time. But maybe the siege towers got in the way more than I thought they might. But in the end, it was a narrative fight, so speaking a little bit more about the kills and performances of certain units, you have to bear in mind that they may very well be somewhat hampered by the fact that the battle kind of had to follow a specific narrative path. And while it didn't go maybe exactly as intended, I think that it ended up being maybe slightly more interesting than it was going to be if Rohan did mow over the outer forces as they did in reality, of course. But yeah, big thank you to Farkin for sending this one to me. I know he sent this one to me back when I just posted the last Minas Tirith battle. Very eager for me to show it because it is obviously a reenactment of what actually happened, but I wanted to give at least a little bit of space before showing it, and the fact that this one is going to be the first battle of 2023 I think is fairly fitting. Obviously new year, iconic map, historical battle, all of those things, fairly good. I'm recording this before I leave to go back home for Christmas, so I am a little bit hurried and rushed off my feet to try and make sure my upload schedule is fine while I'm away. Not too dissimilar to when I took my work trips away, though this is for a slightly more positive reason. And 2023 is likely to be a fairly tumultuous time, though hopefully only in good ways for the channel, but we shall see. Anyway, yeah, big thank you to Farkin for sending this one in. Big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this historical battle. As for what's coming up, I've got a tug-of-war pair of battles, which are probably going to be the next two that we see, starting off with a relatively small and relatively weird pitch battle, which transitions into a much more typical siege battle on an elven settlement, no less, so that should be fairly interesting. Moving forwards as well, I've got a couple more battles from Tommy the Wise, a couple more custom scenarios from him. I've still got those clutch of battles that 2 times sent me as well, and I think a couple of others as well which escape me at the moment, but certainly I've got enough battle replays to last me through basically a month and a half into 2023, and we're not even into that year yet, so things are looking good, at least from that perspective, but we'll see. Things can always change around pretty quickly, especially with the events that are to come, but yeah, should be interesting. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.